Day 1154 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 943,000 military personnel losses. Now to the hardware losses. 4 tanks, 19 APVs, and 26 artillery, plus 1 air defense system, in the form of a Russian Buk M2, destroyed by the 15th Separate Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade. Then headed across to the map, yesterday evening in Volgograd, a fiery spectacle erupted along the Volga River port, as thick plumes of smoke and blazing orange flames lit up the horizon near the Volga hydroelectric station. Local media reported the blaze as a controlled burning of reeds and a routine practice in the region's wetlands, but the dramatic scene, captured in viral images and video, sparked speculation among onlookers, especially following a recent Ukrainian drone attack heard overhead. If it is to be the Volga hydroelectric station that's flaming up, the impact of power supply could disrupt electricity to Russian military-industrial complexes of the region, weakening production outputs. But more than that, it's the economic pressure. Generally speaking, an attack of this type would strain Russia's economy by impacting energy exports in the process. Then moving around the map to the Kursk direction, always keeping busy, with the AFU capturing 9 Russian soldiers in this direction in the last day. More for the exchange fund. Then headed to the map with activity heating up in Zaporizhia, clearly a main priority for the Russian army right now, with a combination of new and recent footage coming to light from Russian attacks. For instance, seen here is Ukraine's Arten unit repelling invading forces on the western attack vector of the Zaporizhia assault. Also for Zaporizhia, new footage from last week where a major Russian offensive in the region was decisively repelled by the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. You may remember, over 300 Russian troops and 40 vehicles including tanks but were detected early by Ukrainian drones. Artillery and UAV strikes commenced 8 kilometers from the front, followed by intense fighting. After 2 hours, Ukrainian forces reported the destruction of 29 enemy vehicles and approximately 140 troops. This was the event where, that you might remember, remarkably not a single Ukrainian position was lost. Then headed across on the map to Kherson, but from a different angle, as the Russian-installed governor of the occupied region, Vladimir Saldo, has ramped up territorial demands along the Dnipro River, with Saldo declaring the absolute priority, quote-unquote, of reclaiming the west bank of the river, but also calls for Russian control of areas in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Dnipro-Petrovsk along the Dnipro River to guarantee the development of infrastructure, as was stated. And yet, well, first of all, their military is right here on the eastern bank, so why don't they just take the western/northern bank? But of course, given the width of the river and the almost entire lack of crossing points found these days, it's barely a few chances in a million that Russia can take this liberated western bank of the Ukrainian liberated northern side. Now, also to mention is that when you dissect the Saldo comments of his recent statements that I just mentioned above, they actually really do have some potential to raise some eyebrows, because he demanded that all river segments, including through Dnipro-Petrovsk, must fall under Russian control to ensure infrastructure development. Meaning that this inherently includes making claim to the area of the river that runs smack bang right down the middle of Dnipro city, and is a claim that also pretty much encompasses the bordering and lesser heard of regions of Kropivnitsky and Poltava. As such, this phrasing suggests a broader ambition to dominate the river's entire path through these oblasts, not just the city-specific segments, to secure strategic assets like the hydroelectric dams, reservoirs, and shipping routes. Now, hypothetically, if Russia was to control these rivers, what's to stop them from claiming the rest of Dnipro-Petrovsk and to control that entire region, citing further security concerns? And then once controlling that more centralized segment of Ukraine, what would then stop Russia from demanding further control of the next level beyond to ensure further Russian control of infrastructure, as it claims? So if you keep traveling northwest up the river, you start to hit the outskirts of Kyiv, some 175 miles away. Why doesn't Russia just take that too? So this latest revelation by the Russian-installed political figure of the occupied Kherson region does go to show that the Kremlin's appetite for land knows no bounds. And though it would be a refreshing change if Russia was to simply say up front, hey everybody, this is precisely what we want, nothing more, nothing less. So as to show a bit of integrity, what a welcome change that would be for once. By contrast, Ukraine has consistently maintained that all land, including Crimea and the Donbass, are integral parts of its sovereign territory, and have been maintaining this political position not just since the SMO, but specifically since the 2014 invasion. It could almost remind you of how the Russian state media outlets sometimes put it, as they say, "to Berlin," in an almost celebratory tone. Ultimately, there's no basis to believe Russia would refrain from dominating, suppressing, and annexing the entire European continent, and even the globe, if it possessed the means to achieve such ambitions. Noting there's no intention to be dramatic in that statement either. It's simply more of a case of they would if they could scenario, seen unfolding daily. Then next on the map, headed to Odessa, as Russia was also seen carrying out a massive Shahed drone strike on the city and its wider region overnight. At least 30 Shahed drones were involved in this heavy attack, as Russia looked to employ saturation tactics, attempting to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. Those air defenses activated to neutralize the threat, although a large fire was seen raging in one of the areas. Similarly, small Shahed attacks were also seen in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia. So given these events, there is now a likely expectation that Ukraine's 30 plus days of hoarding their own deep strike UAVs will soon see the light of day in massive waves or sets of waves on the Russian motherland. Technically speaking, as early as about 6 hours away, as they instead become bathed in the moonlight due to an overnight attack, surely in the works in the upcoming nights. Then taking a look around the map, as for this case, at least one day earlier, some Russian soldiers were boasting about setting up electronic warfare systems on their Lada Niva civilian vehicles just before heading out on a mission. But then the following day, they're already filming how their just arrived vehicle had now been set ablaze after a likely FPV drone attack. Miraculously, no one was hurt, but one Russian soldier commented to say he did feel sorry for the car. And given the backdrop on display as seen here, a road of destruction, it appears quite likely to be a main road rear position that heads to the front, with Russian vehicles getting picked off one by one. Also on the map, this next set of FPV attacks was reported to be fiber optic drones of the Birds of Magyar, exploring buildings and basements from the inside, finding Russian infantry. Although surely some of these first-person drones seen here would not be equipped with a fiber optic spool underneath to handle such maneuvers without getting caught or stuck. So there's really only two options here. Either A, the optical fiber line attached drone is capable of providing sufficient slack to prevent an abrupt stop, or B, it's a wireless drone operating in an environment with poorly performing Russian electronic warfare countermeasures, or none of these countermeasures to speak of at all. Either way, the situation does not bode well for any invading forces. Then headed across to some news for today, so tomorrow's news really, as April 23rd will see London host a critical gathering where Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky, will join representatives of the United Kingdom, France and the United States, utilizing this high-stakes meeting to advocate for an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, with Ukraine in particular announcing that it will push for this measure. The Ukrainian delegation remains steadfast in its humanitarian position, urging protection of civilian infrastructure from military strikes while awaiting Moscow's response. This London summit represents the latest coordinated effort by Western allies to halt Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine's pursuit of a sustainable path toward peace in the ongoing conflict. Now, the highest hope for a meeting of this caliber would likely be to get everybody on the same page about what's expected from Russia, as a means to present a detailed proposal that the Kremlin cannot so easily avoid. Then to the flip side of this news, because after the Easter ceasefire failure and Trump's threats to walk away from flailing peace talks, Putin does a 180 and says he's ready to negotiate direct talks with Ukraine. This change in rhetoric would be the second time in as many months that the Kremlin has switched positions from never negotiating with what it refers to as the Kyiv regime to then move to a stance of openness to negotiating direct with the Ukrainian government. On face value, it sounds all very wonderful, doesn't it? Now, up to this point, Russia and Ukraine have not held direct talks since early 2022. However, at this stage, leadership of both sides of the conflict, not the least of which Putin, has surely gathered or now come to understand that the US administration's patience is starting to wear thin regarding a failure to achieve an unconditional ceasefire or even a successful limited ceasefire agreement that actually works. Due to this evolving diplomatic landscape, Putin appears to be strategically positioning himself as amenable to the process, orchestrating a performance of willingness, aka a bit of political theatrics, where it comes to participating in direct dialogue. And though it might be unwise to rule out anything as a possibility, even still, you generally don't need a crystal ball to tell you that you should expect to see some more Kremlin dragging of the feet, holding off on a direct meeting, or, more likely, expressing readiness for a meeting, but only after certain impossible conditions are met. It's been part of the Kremlin playbook up until now, as it must be said that any Putin statements about openness or readiness for a direct meeting, only to follow it up with conditions that obstruct that very meeting, should inherently reveal Russia's unwillingness to participate in any such peace meetings in the first place. Meanwhile, in Kremlin-related news, Putin referred to a recent strike on Kharkiv, Odessa, and Sumy as retribution and punishment for Ukraine's cursed military activities. But most shockingly was Putin's assessment of some of these sites as civilian in nature, where during an interview he stated, quote, "Is this a civilian target? It is. But what is the target? Military." He may later come to regret that statement. And just prior to those comments, he also flatly made statements on another location, identifying it as a civilian restaurant that was struck by Russian missiles, but also conveniently labeling it as a military target as well. As such, by Putin's own stated logic here, he is effectively justifying the targeting of any civilian sites achieved through labeling them as military in nature. It kind of leaves you speechless. It does me. Then headed across to another rapid-fire Russian military mobilization blunder segment with a lot to cover, so starting off, Maxim Durgin from Russia's 5th Tank Brigade, now a POW in Ukrainian custody, during an interview spoke of how he found his way to Ukraine. He said he enlisted not for glory but for finances when his father-in-law was dying. Then, after witnessing countless Russian casualties and experiencing the full symphony of warfare, he's now a POW who would rather face imprisonment than return to be slaughtered for nothing, as he puts it, a truth many Russian soldiers acknowledge when they're desperate to survive. Then for another blunder, Russian telegram channels claim their commanders profit from their own slain troops, resulting from high attrition assaults, treating the war as a business scheme to extract payments. The telegrammer also states that these commanders may deliberately disrupt any ceasefire agreements since peace threatens their income stream and could leave them vulnerable to prosecution when the system needs new targets. This disconnect between Commander of Field Operations and the Russian Ministry of Defense reveals a dangerous lack of operational alignment that can potentially undermine the effectiveness and go a long way to explain Russia's reoccurring tactical failures. Then to a final blunder, and somewhat owing to the above story, no shortage seen on continued reports of gym raids in Moscow, in the surge to enlist more personnel for the SMO, as a means for Russia to continue the fight as long as they can. I guess something's gotta give when it comes to manpower needs. Then headed across to a bit of a lighter segment to round off the video today, with this piece on what could really be man's best friend for Ukrainian soldiers, as, in this case, their feline companions bring to their attention Russian aviation strikes, as their companions provide a critical 15-second early warning notice by scurrying away, right as Russian airstrikes are still momentarily airborne. Champion trench mates, foxhole or battle buddies right there. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks once again for all of the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!